to Sunday School, Upper Room Ministries here in Dover, Pennsylvania. So glad that you've joined us today. Where we are continuing our study on the prophecies of the Bible, which have come to pass and which have not yet come to pass. We are continuing in the book of Isaiah, so let's open up there. In chapter 44 is where we left off. In the last session, we finished with prophecy 1744, verses 1 through 6. And if you to read verses 6 all the way through 20, you'll discover that this is a complete denouncement of idolatry and the stupidity of putting your faith in idols made of wood, clay, and gold and silver and whatnot. Then we move to verses 21 through 23. And here, in prophecy 1745, it talks about, God talks about how Israel shall not be forgotten by him. And verse 22 says, I have blotted out as a thick cloud thy transgressions, and as a cloud thy sins. Return unto me, for I have redeemed thee. So, this is talking about a return unto the Lord by Israel. And by returning, God is going to blot out their sins, which he will certainly do come the millennial kingdom. Yes, I definitely believe this is a millennial prophecy. Verse 23 says, Sing, O ye heavens, for the Lord hath done it. Shout, ye lower parts of the earth, break forth into singing, ye mountains and forests, and every tree therein. So this sounds like a worldwide celebration here in verse 23. So the complete and total redemption and forgiveness of Israel's sins, particularly idolatry, as pointed out previously in the chapter, will be forgiven. So this is a millennial prophecy yet to be fulfilled. Okay. We then come to verse 26. This is prophecy 1746. This foretells the future return of Israel from Babylonian captivity. Here it says, that confirmeth the word of his servant, and performeth the counsel of his messengers, that saith to Jerusalem, Thou shalt be inhabited, and to the cities of Judah, Ye shall be built, and I will raise up the decayed places thereof. The word of his servant, I believe, refers to Cyrus, the ruler of Medo-Persia, who conquered Babylon, and then allowed the Israelites to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple and the walls, as covered in the book of Ezra. So this is a prophecy that has been fulfilled. In fact, it's documented in 2 Chronicles 36, verses 22 through 23. Okay. Then verse 27, that saith to the deep, Be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers. That's prophecy 1747. This refers to the turning of the river Euphrates out of its regular channel flowing through Babylon, so that Cyrus could get into the city by the riverbed and take Babylon by surprise. Cyrus would turn the river into a large lake, which had already been made ready to carry off excessive waters of the Euphrates. So again, this prophecy points to the actions of Cyrus in his conquest of Babylon. Verse 28, Cyrus is actually mentioned by name. And this prophecy is being foretold long before Cyrus was even born. This prophecy is 1748. It says, That saith of Cyrus, He is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. So here Isaiah is foretelling of Cyrus's commission for Israel to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Again, I mean, this is before the temple has even been destroyed by the Babylonians. So this is quite a prophecy. Definitely. Okay, chapter 45. Again, these are prophecies pertaining to Cyrus. Verse 1, thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden to subdue nations before him. Okay. Media-Persia would become a world power after its defeat of Babylon. And by being a world power, Media-Persia would have to subdue a number of nations. And there were 14 nations that were conquered under Cyrus. They include the Sicilians, the Syrians, the Phoenicians, the Arabians, the Lydians, Carians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and the Marianines, just to name a few. Okay, so this is a foretelling of the worldwide power that Media-Persia would become under Cyrus. Then, verse 2, it says, I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut into sunder bars of iron. And I will give the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know I, the Lord, which call thee by name, am the God of Israel. Now this is a prophecy foretelling of all the treasures that Cyrus will take out of Babylon. In verse 2, I will break the gates of brass and cut into sunder the bars of iron. The gates of Babylon were made of brass and were locked with bars of iron, and foretelling they would be broken by Cyrus. And then verse 3, the treasures that shall be carried off. Cyrus would carry off from Babylon gold and silver that numbered in billions of today's dollars. Okay, so those are prophecies that have all come to pass. Okay. Then we skip ahead to verse 8, where it says, drop down, ye heavens, from above, and let the skies pour down righteousness. Let the earth open, and let them bring forth salvation. And let righteousness spring up together. I, the Lord, have created. So this is talking about a widespread outpouring of salvation. And the earth, salvation from heavens, and righteousness coming up from the earth. This is going to be a worldwide phenomenon, which will be a reality in the millennial kingdom. So this is a yet unfulfilled prophecy. Okay. Verse 13, prophecy 1752. Again, this is a prophecy pertaining to Cyrus. It says, I have raised him up in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways. He shall build my city, and he shall let go my captives, not for prince nor reward, saith the Lord of hosts. Now, go back and read the book of Ezra, and you'll find that Cyrus released the Israelites to rebuild Jerusalem simply because he was asked to. Nothing more. So, and that was just, I believe, at least according to this verse, that he was acting by the will of God. He was in the will of God when he granted this request. It says, I will direct all his ways, and he shall build my city. I believe Cyrus also provided materials for the rebuilding of Jerusalem and its walls. Okay. Prophecy 1753, verses 14 through 16. These three verses outline the salvation of many nations. It mentions Egypt, Ethiopia, and the Sabians. Go down to verse 16. They shall be ashamed and also confounded, all of them. They shall go into confusion together that are the maker of idols. And verse 15, verily thou art a God that hides thyself, O Savior of Israel. All right. So, I mean, they will be saved, but first they're all going to fall. First, these will be nations most likely under Antichrist rule. So this will be a millennial. This is a millennial prophecy. And then in verse 17, but Israel shall be saved in the Lord with an everlasting salvation. Ye shall not be ashamed, nor confounded, nor confounded world without end. So, without end means it's never going to end, which really can only point to the millennial kingdom. Okay. Verse 23, prophecy 1755. It says, I have sworn by myself, the word is gone out of my mouth in righteousness, and shall not return, that every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall swear. This is a prophecy, a statement that's actually repeated 2 times in the New Testament. Romans 14, verse 11, and Philippians 2, verse 10. This is foretelling of a day when every knee, every soul that ever lived, regardless of whether they lived for God or whether they lived against God or whether they lived in ignorance, they will all bow and confess with their mouths that Jesus Christ is Lord. And that makes me think of Romans 10:9. If you shall confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. Yes. Well, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord before this day, then you shall be saved. If on this day, this is the very first time you do it, you won't be saved. It's as simple as that. Okay. Prophecy 1756, verse 25. In the Lord shall all the seed of Israel be justified, and shall glory. So, all the seed of Israel, not just Judah, but all of Israel, which includes the 10 northern tribes, they shall be justified. This talks about the future unification of the nations of Israel and all being justified. They've already begun to start to come back together, and upon the second coming of Christ, all will be justified. Chapter 46, starting with verses 1 and 2. Prophecy 1757. In verse 1, 2 Babylonian gods, Bel and Nebo, are identified. It says, Bel boweth down, Nebo stoopeth. Their idols were upon beasts and upon the cattle. Your carriages were heavy laden, they are a burden to the weary beasts. So we're talking about many, many graven images of just these 2 pagan gods being loaded up on carts and hauled away by animals, most likely when Cyrus invades and crushes Babylon. It says, verse 2, they stoop, they bow down together, they could not deliver the burden, but themselves are gone into captivity. So, a foretelling that these 2 false gods will not save Babylon when Cyrus invades. So this is a prophecy that has come to pass. And really it applies to any situation. if you put your trust in anything other than God to get you out of trouble, you won't be saved. They're not going to help you, just like Bel and Nebo could not help Babylon. They were simply thrown into carts and hauled away with all the other treasures that Cyrus hauled out of Babylon. Verses 3 and 4, prophecy 1758. These two verses talk about God's protection and an eventual deliverance of Israel. This is when it talks about God's protection. Yes, there were times where God allowed invaders to come into Israel and into Jerusalem and run roughshod over it as a means of punishing them for their sins and their transgressions. And yet at the same time, the people of Israel never died out. They've never become extinct, regardless of how many times enemies have tried to wipe them out. It's because simply God has his hand of protection, and there's always going to be some that survive and some that will press on, and come the millennial kingdom, God will deliver them from their enemies once and for all. So this is a prophecy that's being fulfilled, that becomes fulfilled throughout history and will be fulfilled in completion come the millennial kingdom. Verses 10 and 11, prophecy 1759. This talks about how Cyrus shall execute God's counsel. In verse 11, it says, calling a ravenous bird from the east, the man that executeth my counsel from a far country, yea, I have spoken it, I will bring it to pass. This ravenous bird, again, talks about Cyrus. And he is going to carry out the will of God. It says, the things that God says will happen to Babylon and then will happen to Israel after the fall of Babylon will happen, and it's going to happen through Cyrus. That's something we have to remember. Quite often, God fulfills his plans through humans, just like us. Jesus came to earth. He was 100% human, and he fulfilled every prophecy pointing to his first coming, as spoken by God in the Bible. So that's just something we've got to be aware of, that something may have been spoken by a prophet that perhaps one of us is intended to fulfill. Okay? So we are special. I doubt very seriously Cyrus was aware of how special he was, especially considering these prophecies were all made before Cyrus was even born. But they all came to pass exactly as God said they would. It's because God executed his will through him. All right. Verses 12 and 13. These two verses talk about the salvation of Israel. Verse 13 says, I bring near my righteousness, it shall not be far off, and my salvation shall not tarry, and I will place salvation is in Zion for Israel, my glory. Again, this will definitely happen come the millennial kingdom. Chapter 47, prophecy 1761. This entire chapter points to the fall of Babylon. The entire chapter is one complete prophecy. So let's go through this chapter and see what God has to say about Babylon in regards to its fall. Verses 1 and 2, it says, "Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground, there is no throne. O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate." And this verse, Babylon is, is looked as a woman, perhaps a virgin princess. Once sitting on a throne, now just sitting on the ground, sitting in the dust, sitting in ashes. I'm sure there were a number of ashes after Cyrus had his way in Babylon. Then verse 2 says, "Take the millstones and grind meal, uncover thy locks, make bare the leg under the thigh, pass over the rivers. Thy nakedness shall be uncovered, yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man." Okay. That means there will be no negotiations. You are going to be stripped bare for the world to see. And Cyrus did indeed strip it bare, taking all those treasures out of Babylon and into his possession. It says, "As for our Redeemer, the Lord hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. Sit thou silent and get thee into the darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the lady of the kingdoms." Now, at the time, Babylon was the world power of the ancient world. There was none even close to the amount of domination that Babylon had. But according to the Lord, that will no longer and never be the case. And it hasn't been the case. The ancient city of Babylon has never ever been rebuilt. In fact, it was prophesied earlier in Isaiah that it would never be rebuilt. We covered that in an earlier episode. So, as I said before, Saddam Hussein, he tried to rebuild Babylon, and it never happened. Then we turn to verse 6. Here God explains his willingness to allow Israel to be invaded. It says, "I was wroth with my people, had polluted my inheritance, and given it into their hands. Thou didn't show them any mercy." So, apparently, because God had allowed Babylon to conquer Israel, he still expected Babylon to treat them with mercy, and yet they did not. They just treated them with absolute ruthlessness. It's something God never commanded them to do, and as a result, Babylon must be held accountable for their lack of mercy, despite the fact that God used them as a means of punishment for Israel. I know that's a bit hard to process, but God is a just God. And as far as He's concerned, He is justified in all His ways, both against Israel and against Babylon. Okay, then go down in verse 8. Verse 8, Babylon is described as a pleasure-crazy kingdom, living at ease and feeling secure, and just bragging about being the greatest in the world. And they say, "You say I am self-sufficient and not accountable to anyone." That's the same sort of attitude that Nebuchadnezzar felt when he looked upon Babylon and felt to himself that he created this whole empire himself. He was just saying, "I am self-sufficient. I am in need of no one, including God." God humbled him by sending him to live in the wilderness with an insane mind and allowing him to come back. Nebuchadnezzar repented, but the nation of Babylon did not, as evidence under Belshazzar. Belshazzar, when he was delivered the writing on the wall, was having a big party, celebrating himself and using goblets that were reserved for sacred Jewish ceremonies for his own pagan pleasure. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back as far as God was concerned. So again, the love of pleasure and valuing it above everything else, including God, does indeed lead to destruction. Verse 10 talks about how Babylon would feel secure in all their wickedness. And they'd say to themselves, no one sees me, but God sees it all. And no act of wickedness shall escape God. Verse 11. Then it says, so disaster will overtake them, and suddenly you won't be able to charm it away. You won't be able to put it off. And desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know. So apparently, they will experience desolation that they've ever experienced, quite possibly could never even imagine, because Babylon, at the height of its power, never could have imagined it just falling to any army at any time. But it did happen because God ordained it to happen. Remember, God is all-powerful. He can bring down any empire at any time. Okay. It says, then in verse 12, stand now with thine enchantments and with thy multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth, if so be thou shalt profit, if so mayest prevail. So, this is a challenge, to Babylon to call forth its sorcerers and its spirits and whatever it's put its faith in to try and save itself. This in verse 13 it talks about astrologers, prognosticators, and all those other councils that the Babylonians came to. Notice that they're all occult councils and not godly councils. He says, go ahead and put your faith in them, consult them all you want. In the end, it's all worthless. Verse 14, behold, they shall be as stubble, the fire shall burn them up. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There shall not be coal to warm it, nor fire to sit before it. Thus shall they be unto thee with whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth. They will wander, every one to his quarter, none shall save thee. In the end, he is foreseeing nobody is going to save Babylon at the end, and no one did. Okay, well that concludes today's episode. Thank you for joining us, and next week we shall begin chapter 48. Have a good week.
Let you